I'm Adam Green with No More News. Today I'm joined by author and 9/11 researcher Christopher Bollyn, ChristopherBollyn.com. He's got the books, his new book, The War on Terror, The Plot to Rule the Middle East, and his previous book from, what year did Solving 9/11 come out?
2012.
2012, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World. Two books that are the best books on 9/11 in my opinion. They point out the who, why, and how. How about the people that are in support that come out to the event? Are there people that are on the fence, or is everybody mostly supporters?
Well, that's hard to say. It depends where I'm speaking. I've spoken in places like Spokane, Washington, where when I asked the people, about their feelings on Israel, about half the audience was Christian Zionist. So it depends where I'm speaking. But most people are interested, obviously, and I would say most of them are actually supportive of my position. They're familiar with it because it's a group of people who are quite awake, and they're very much aware of 9/11 research that come to my presentations generally. Mm-hmm. It's not people that don't know anything about it. It's the average person who doesn't know anything about 9/11 is not interested in 9/11 for a reason. They're in denial. They don't want to talk about it. It scares them. So the people who come to my event, I often say, are some of the most extraordinary people in America because they have moral courage, and they have the intelligence to understand that they've been lied to.
You traveled all around the U.S. and all over the world. What is the state of the 9/11 truth movement, and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, how has it evolved? It's gotten more, at this point, 16 years later, it's gotten more real. I mean, the people now understand more about 9/11, who did it and why they did it, because we're 16 years into the war on terror. And my current tour is primarily focused on the war on terror because this is the ongoing crime. 9/11 was the atrocity that happened 16 years ago. 3,000 people were killed in broad daylight. But ever since then, more and more people have been killed every day because of the war on terror. And the war on terror and 9/11 are like two sides of a counterfeit coin. It's a fraud. And once people understand the 9/11 fraud, they will understand the fraud of the war on terror. But in actual reality, the war on terror is older, much older.
Yeah, and your book gets into that, the origins, 1979, the Jerusalem Conference.
Right.
What do you think the 9/11 movement needs to really get over the hump and reach a critical mass?
Well, that's a good question because the mainstream media is not ever going to address 9/11 truth because they're complicit in the crime. So what needs to happen is that we're having a revolution of awareness in this country. People are waking up and realizing that they've been lied to by the media and the government for the last 16 years and longer. And in the case, it's still a situation that the John F. Kennedy murder is still covered up by the mainstream media and the government. So this is what we hope to achieve is that we hope that people of well-known reputations and means, deal with 9/11 truth, come to terms with it, and embrace it. And when more and more people understand the deception of 9/11, we hope that we can end the war on terror. And what we really want to do is, we want a proper investigation of 9/11 because it's never been investigated at all as a crime. The evidence was destroyed. We want to bring the guilty to account, the people who were involved in the crime and the deception and the covering up of the crime. And we want to end the war. We want to end the war on terror and, again, prosecute those people who have been part of the war crimes that have been committed. Because the war on terror is primarily a war of conquest and aggression that's being waged under the pretext of fighting terrorism. But it's not. It's a crime. And so the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, these are wars of aggression. And that's what the British inquiry, the Chilcot inquiry, made very clear. But we haven't had anything like the Chilcot inquiry in this country. But we need to do that. We need to clean house because We can't go forward into a future of peace and prosperity based on the lies that we've accepted for the last 16 years as true.
Do you think we need to mobilize around a political candidate that talks about 9/11 truth? Like, somebody need to break into politics, like maybe Tulsi Gabbard. She talks about ISIS and funding ISIS. Have you spoken to her?
Well, I haven't spoken to her, but I know she had the bill to stop funding terrorists, ISIS and what have you in Syria. But I think that for us to put all our chips into a political candidate would be a mistake, because the political landscape is so tilted against us. We don't have any congressperson calling for 9/11 truth yet, after 16 years. Some people are calling, like Barbara Lee and Tulsi Gabbard, are calling for an end to the certain aspects of the war on terror, or renegotiating the authority to use military force, which is the funding and the authorization for the war on terror. But we need a popular resistance to this. We need, it's like I grew up during the Vietnam time, and there was a popular resistance to the war in Vietnam. We don't see anything like that in this country today. 16 years. You have to remember that the war on terror is the longest war in U.S. history at this point, the oldest war in U.S. history, and also the most expensive war in U.S. history. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. Originally started out to go after the terrorists who committed 9/11, many of whom supposedly died on 9/11. So going after a ragtag group of students and Taliban in Afghanistan, that shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks. But from the very beginning, they said this is going to take decades. Mm-hmm. Well, why? Because they knew that the real underlying strategy for the war on terror was to redraw the map of the Middle East, to conquer territories, and to cut the Arab countries into pieces. And that would take some time.
In your book, Alan Sobrowski writes that you're optimistic that Trump might disclose 9/11 truth. I'm not sure when he wrote that, if he had already bombed Syria and revamped the war in Afghanistan, but do you still have that sentiment about Trump?
Well, I mean, I hope that Trump will do something about 9/11 truth and ending the war. He spoke about these things when he didn't speak about 9/11 truth specifically, but he did talk about having better relations with Russia, ending the conflict in Syria, and he has done some good things. He's pulled out from the CIA funding of the Syrian rebels. The war in Syria is now coming to a conclusion, largely because the United States has pulled back its support. So that's a good thing. The sooner the war in Syria is over, the sooner we get some balance, the better. I would have preferred that Donald Trump from the very beginning took a more muscular policy on ending the wars in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. But he didn't do that.
What do you think about his relationship with Silverstein and Netanyahu mm-hmm. and the Kushners? Mm-hmm. You really think that's possible, that there's any chance that he will do that?
Well, he has had very close relations with Israelis and American Zionists for a long time. But that doesn't mean that he's in cahoots with the 9/11 cover-up. I would hope that as a New Yorker and as an American, he would not cover up the truth of 9/11, which is the fundamental thing that I'm talking about here. You can as a political leader, and when he ran for office, he told his policy guy that he wants to be the most pro-Israeli candidate out there. He was saying that because he wanted to win the election. But I would hope that even though he has these relations with these Zionists, that he is not party to the 9/11 crime or the cover-up.
I think he's a part of the cover-up because on 9/11 he said the buildings were so strong and he thought there was more than planes and bombs. Mm-hmm. And then a few days later he changed his tune completely and mm-hmm. said that, it's kamikazes and they're terrorists and there's nothing that would have stopped the buildings from coming down.
Right, that's right. He said on 11th of September, he said that there had been most likely bombs that went off simultaneously with the plane impacts, which is pretty true. pretty correct. I mean, a good observation. And as you said, 2 days later, he changed his tune. So whether somebody called him up and told him to change his tune is most likely the case. But that's happened all across the U.S., you know. I saw a professor from New Mexico Tech. He did the same thing. On day one, he spoke truth about 9/11. 10 days later, he changed his tune. And, you know, this is political. I think it's the politic thing to do for these people. They want to either keep their position, they want to keep their funding, they want to stay on the right side of the tracks, and so they go along with the cover-up.
Can you talk about your frustration, or do you ever think about giving up the fight for 9/11?
Well, that's a good question because, no, I haven't. I've never thought about giving up. And, you know, I can tell you that it's been very difficult. It's been very difficult at times. But, you know, it would be worse to give up, especially, you know, knowing what I know and having done the research that I've done over a period of years. It would be just stupid to give up. But more than that, it's like to give up and to give to let the lie go on for even one more day. It would be a sin. It's wrong. Yeah. You know, and this whole thing is so wrong. The way these people have hijacked our reality. The first chapter of this book, The War on Terror, it's like living with here it is, coping with artificial reality. Because in the 16 years since 9/11, that's where this country's been. The United States has been in this artificial reality. You know, we've been given a lie about what happened on 9/11, and based on that lie, we've gone to war. We're waged war against, you know, half a dozen Islamic nations. We've done terrible devastation to places like Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, and we've done great damage to this country. You know, the cost of the war on terror is at least $2.5 trillion right now. That's not counting future costs down the road, which will double that. I mean, this is suicidal. And, you know, I love this country, and I want to see this country restore some of its integrity and get back on track. It's like the country's been hijacked. There's no better way to say it. The country's been hijacked. And you know, when the country's been hijacked, you can't just sit back in your first-class seat drinking champagne and not worry where the plane's going. You got to turn it around. And that's what I think, that's my obligation, and that's the obligation of people in the country who understand 9/11 truth.